Okay, think about this for a second. There's this massive contradiction sitting right at the heart of modern science.
It's a huge one.
On one hand, you have so many researchers claiming humans are just different from animals in degree. We're just a bit smarter, a little more complex.
Just another step on the evolutionary ladder.
Exactly. But then, those same scientists go into their labs to design an experiment, especially one about language or morality, and how do they act?
They act as if humans are fundamentally, radically different in kind.
That's the friction point. That tension between what scientists say they believe and what their work implies they believe. And that's what we are diving into today.
It's really a crisis of identity for our scientific age. If we're just a slightly fancier animal, why is our entire legal and moral world built on the idea that we're unique?
And we're going to explore that very question through a classic, incredibly sharp piece of philosophy. Enjoy a bold new take on book coverage with this extended analysis.
This is more than just a summary, though we'll cover that too.
We'll examine how the author builds his argument, how he earns your trust, or maybe loses it, giving you the tools to read with a much sharper eye. Should you read this book? This will definitely help you decide. It's also fantastic for any aspiring writers out there.
And if you find this format valuable, please let us know. Your feedback really does shape what we do next.
The book is Mortimer J. Adler's 1967 work, The Difference of Man and the Difference It Makes.
And its mission is crystal clear: to take this age-old debate and put it under a logical microscope.
He wants to know if the gap between us and other animals is just quantitative, a matter of degree, or if it's something truly fundamental, a difference in kind.
Before we go deeper, you should know that you're experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation, all powered by Google's NotebookLM for a more dynamic book analysis.
So let's set the stage with Adler himself. His credibility, his ethos is so important to how he approaches this.
Right. This is not some academic hiding in an ivory tower. Adler was a major public intellectual.
He was the director of the Institute for Philosophical Research, chairman of the board of editors for Encyclopedia Britannica,
And a co-founder of the Great Books program. He comes from that Aristotelian Thomistic tradition. That means he values clear definitions and rigorous logic above pretty much everything else.
And that background really defines who he's writing for, doesn't it?
Absolutely. He wasn't trying to score points with other philosophers. He explicitly wrote for, as he put it, Joe Dokes, the intelligent, curious person on the street.
He was aiming for cultural impact, not just a journal article.
And the timing, 1967, is everything. Think about what was happening.
Evolutionary biology was on a roll. You had behaviorism in psychology, early cognitive science, the very beginnings of computer science.
And all of these fields were, in one way or another, chipping away at the idea of human exceptionalism.
So Adler saw this happening and basically said, wait a minute, you're all trying to answer a deep philosophical question using only scientific tools, and you can't. Not without getting your concepts straight first.
And that is the perfect entry point to his core strategy. He realized the problem wasn't really a fight over the scientific facts.
It was a fight over the meaning of the words.
It was philosophical confusion. People were using terms like difference in kind without ever properly defining them.
Okay, so let's get into his solution. This logical architecture, the logos of the book, is how he cuts through all that ambiguity. He lays out this four-part system for thinking about difference.
He starts with the really obvious one. Differences in degree. This is purely quantitative.
You're taller than me, a blue whale is heavier than a squirrel. Simple.
Exactly. Things you can measure on a continuous line. But then he introduces the first trap. He calls them apparent differences in kind.
What does he mean by that?
Well, imagine you find two species. Let's call them A and C. They look totally different. You might think they're different in kind.
But maybe you just haven't found the missing link yet. Species B.
That's it exactly. The difference only looks radical because the intermediary steps are missing from the fossil record. It's a failure of discovery, not a true break in nature.
And this is such a critical point because a lot of scientists at the time were arguing that all differences between humans and animals were just like that.
Right. We just have to find the missing links. Adler grants that possibility for many traits, but he uses his framework to show it can't be the whole story.
So then he moves into the true differences in kind. And the first type he calls a superficial difference in kind.
This one is based on a threshold effect.
Give us the classic analogy for that.
It's water. Think about water, steam, and ice. Chemically, they're all the same thing,
Yeah.
H2O.
Same underlying stuff.
But once you hit a specific quantitative threshold, 0 degrees Celsius, the the properties completely transform. Liquid becomes solid. It's a new state of being, but from the same material cause.
So in terms of the brain, this would be like saying if you just add enough neurons, a massive quantitative increase, you could suddenly flip a switch and get a new ability.
Precisely. Maybe something like basic symbolic communication emerges. The ability is new, but the underlying cause is still just more of the same material stuff. It's a strong argument for the materialist view.
But Adler saves his most powerful category for last, the one at the heart of the whole book.
The radical difference in kind.
And for a difference to be radical, what are the conditions?
Two things. One, the trait has to be entirely absent in other creatures. Not just a little bit of it, but zero. And two, and this is the most important part, its underlying causal structure has to be fundamentally different.
Meaning no amount of just adding more brain matter, no matter how complex it gets, could ever produce this new property. The raw materials aren't there.
Correct. And for Adler, coming from his philosophical tradition, the prime candidate for this is human conceptual thought.
What does he mean by that exactly?
The ability to grasp abstract universals. An animal can perceive this triangle or that circle, but only a human can grasp the concept of triangularity or circularity itself.
Concepts like justice or infinity, things that have no direct physical form.
Right. For Adler, if that ability is genuinely non-material, then it must come from a non-material cause. And if that's true, then humans are radically, not just superficially, different in kind.
So this whole taxonomy, this framework, it's more than just a classification system. It's a persuasive move.
It's an incredibly powerful one. He takes what everyone thought was a purely scientific problem and reframes it as a mixed question.
A question that needs science, yes, but also needs philosophical clarity to even understand what the science means.
And this is where his ethos, his credibility, becomes so important again. To make that move work, you have to prove you've done your homework in both fields.
And he does. He spends a huge part of the book engaging directly with the animal behavior studies and the evolutionary science of the 1960s. He's showing the reader, I've read your science, now let me help you clarify your philosophy.
Then he makes this brilliant rhetorical move. We could call it a cognitive dissonance strategy.
How does that work?
He just holds up two things side by side. On one side, the scientist's explicit claim, humans differ only in degree.
And on the other side?
Their actual research practices. He points to the chimp language studies of that era. Researchers were trying to prove chimps could learn language, but their entire method was based on treating human abstract language as a unique standard that the chimps could never really reach.
It forces you to see the contradiction. If they really believed it was just a difference in degree, their experiments would look completely different.
And his tone is so measured here. He doesn't call them frauds. He basically suggests they're suffering from a conceptual blind spot. He says they're ignorant of the difference between apparent differences in degree and superficial differences in kind. They just don't have the right tools for the job.
So after meticulously laying all this out, applying his framework to the evidence, what's the grand conclusion?
This is the most surprising part. He concludes that the scientific evidence as of 1967 results in a draw.
Wait, a draw. After all that work building this intricate system, he ends by saying the evidence is inconclusive. Doesn't that sort of undercut his whole project?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But it's actually the most masterful move in the book.
How so?
By admitting the evidence can't settle the debate between materialism and immaterialism, he performs an act of supreme intellectual honesty. He refuses to stretch the data to fit a preconceived conclusion.
So he strengthens his own credibility by conceding a stalemate.
Precisely. He proves that the framework works perfectly to clarify the terms of the debate, even if the empirical data at the time wasn't enough to declare a winner. He shows you how to think about the problem, and that's more important than telling you what to think.
This level of detail on analytical structure is vital. For more intellectual engagement, search for Mindful Moments, our YouTube channel offering AI book analysis, summaries, and critiques inspiring reflection and rational thought.
Now let's get to the pathos, the emotional core. It's right there in the title. The difference it makes.
He's signaling that this isn't just an abstract debate. This has real-world consequences.
It has enormous consequences. Let's play it out. Say we conclude that human thought is only a superficial difference in kind, that we just have a bigger, more complex neural network.
So we're just very sophisticated biological machines.
Right. What does that do to our concept of human dignity, of moral responsibility? Our entire legal system is built on the idea that humans are rational agents with free will.
An idea that depends on us being fundamentally different from an animal acting on instinct.
Exactly. If we dissolve that radical difference, if we're all just products of material causality, then the philosophical foundation of our laws and ethics starts to look very, very shaky. That's the difference it makes.
We should touch on the limitations of the book genre, though. By writing for a general audience, he has to simplify some things, right?
For sure. He can't get into a 50-page critique of a specific linguistics paper. That choice expanded his influence, but it limited the academic depth. And more critically, the whole argument really hinges on you being open to his Aristotelian premise that a non-material cause, a radical difference, is even possible.
A committed materialist might read the book and say he's begging the question from the start.
They might. They argue that by even looking for an immaterial cause, he's already assuming what he wants to prove, making a draw the best he could ever hope for.
But even with those limits, it feels astonishingly relevant today, maybe even more so than in 1967.
Oh, absolutely. Just substitute artificial intelligence for animal behavior studies, and the book reads like it was written yesterday.
His central demand that we have to examine the underlying causal structure, not just the outward behavior, is the #1 philosophical question in AI.
It's the whole debate. When a large language model generates perfectly human-like text, is it actually thinking? Does it understand the concept of justice?
Or is it just an incredibly complex threshold effect? A superficial difference in kind based on massive computation, but without any genuine conceptual grasp.
Adler's framework forces us to ask, is this real thought or is it a simulation? Is genuine understanding a radical difference that a purely computational system can never achieve?
The answer to that question will define our relationship with technology for the next century.
It will. The fundamental tension Adler identified hasn't gone away. It's just shifted from the biology lab to the computer science lab. The question of whether our ideas about human dignity can survive a purely materialist explanation of consciousness is the challenge of our time.
So, a final thought for our listeners to take with them.
Given Adler's very deliberate conclusion that the evidence produces a draw, it leaves the choice with you. So, here's the question. What philosophical assumptions do you bring to the table when you read about a new breakthrough in AI or neuroscience? When you see new evidence, which lens do you unconsciously put on first?
Click the link on screen for the in-depth book summary. Subscribe, share, purchase via link, and think rationally.
See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.